Hello everyone, welcome to the session on how to approach case studies for section B of GS paper 4 in UPSC CSE mains examination by Sunya IAS. So case studies form a part of section B of ethics paper. There are 6 case studies in all. These case studies have a number of questions under each of them which are required to be answered. The case studies are of 120 marks in all. And the syllabus mentions only one line for section B, which is case studies on above issues, which means that the entire syllabus for section A, whatever it includes, case studies can be asked on any of those issues. So your preparation for tackling case studies should be in accordance with what is mentioned in the UPSC syllabus for GS paper 4 section A. So how to prepare? You should focus on the structure of the case study. Every case study is going to be unique. There is no set pattern on how to tackle a case study. However, what you should do while preparing for GS paper 4 examination is that have a few structures already prepared in your mind so that when you go and attempt the case study, you have a starting point. You are not blank in the exam hall after looking at the case study. So try to practice forming different structures and using it in your case study practices sessions. So structure I will be dealing with in the next few slides of this particular video. So you will get more clarity on that. So have frameworks ready. So a business oriented case study can be answered using financial, marketing, operations related aspects, strategic aspects. What is the supply chain in the business? What are the corporate social responsibilities related to that particular case study for the business? So this is one type of framework. Administrative case studies might be answered using the aspects which are important in administration. For example, documentation, transparency, accountability. Then you have hierarchy. What are the set processes to tackle the particular issue? What does the constitution say on that particular issue? Is there a process which is given to tackle that ethical aspect or not? What is the public interest in the particular issue, right? So there are different kinds of frameworks for different sorts of case studies, and you must be able to think with your or with all your knowledge that you have gained while preparing for general studies and your specific preparation for ethics, that which kind of framework will be suitable for which type of case study. Another example would be for disaster management. In disaster management, more than what is the financial or marketing aspect, you have to focus on preparedness for the particular disaster. For example, there's one place which is in a highly sensitive zone for earthquakes, right? So what will you focus on the chosen courses of action? Let's say in the particular case study it is mentioned that the earthquake has happened and you are the district collector of that particular district and you have to coordinate rescue efforts, right? So you will obviously mention all the immediate steps that you will take to ensure that different sections of the population are safe. However, as an afterthought, you can also mention that you will focus on preparedness efforts, community preparedness, right? You will also form a disaster mitigation and prevention action plan. In the prevention action plan, you cannot obviously prevent a natural disaster, right? However, you can prepare your construction norms, your construction policies according to the particular area. For example, in the earthquake related case study, you can have earthquake resistant structures. Now the technology is there, and if you read in the newspapers, you'll get to know that there are different kinds of technology which can predict what the stress would be on a particular structure. So use that particular knowledge and include that in your answer, right? So in other forms of disaster management case studies, you can have other things. For example, which kind of force will you use? State disaster response force or NDRF? How will you reach the particular place? So this is very case study specific. So the point that I am trying to make here is that use all of your general studies knowledge of other papers to solve your ethics case studies. Coming to keywords, so, as you have been listening to me over the last few minutes, you would realize that in business, I use terms like marketing, finance, operations, supply chain, corporate social responsibility. In disaster management, I used words like um, zones, earthquake zones, then community preparedness, disaster mitigation. So there are certain keywords which you can use to display more domain knowledge in that particular case study, right? So we will be dealing also with all sorts of ethical keywords, and you will be getting notes on these ethical keywords. So you can use that in your answers to enrich them, to convey your ideas in a better way, and to show that you have done some basic groundwork while preparing for ethics case studies, right? Next, we come to brainstorming. So in the ethics case studies, the case studies are becoming very complex these days. The ones that you get in the exam, there's no issue which you can clearly identify in that particular case study, and there are no easy courses of action that you can take to resolve the particular problem, which is why it is being asked in your ethics case study exam, right? Why this is happening is because you need to choose between two equally undesirable courses of action or two or more equally unfavorable alternatives that you have in the particular situation, right? So brainstorming is what you need to do to identify the possible courses of action that you can take in a particular scenario. We will be talking more about that in the later slides. Identifying the root issue. As I just mentioned, in the case studies that are coming in the exam these days, the root issue is not highlighted. Plus, there is not one but multiple issues involved in that particular case study. So, you need to look at it from multiple dimensions to finally zero in on which are the main issues in that particular case study, right? So, we'll talk more about this in the later slides. Coming to presentation. The presentation of your answer for a case study has to be very clear, structured, simple, and it should look presentable. You should not fill the entire answer sheet that you have from the top left to the bottom right with words. However, there should be clear-cut addressing of all the questions. You should underline the parts of the questions that you have addressed already, and try to include some diagrams if that addresses a particular portion of your question. However, do not force diagrams on your in your answers. That is not what is being asked for. Coming to the final thing, time management. We'll discuss about how to manage time for ethics case studies. That being said, it is extremely important that you practice ethics paper in the time limit of 3 hours before you go and write your first paper in the examination, because time management is a serious issue in GS paper 4, and it kind of pulls down your entire score if you're not able to do one particular case study well, or if you leave 30 to 40 marks worth of theory questions. So that is the trade-off in ethics paper, and you need to learn how to manage your time well. We'll be discussing more of that in the future slides. Coming to things to keep in mind while answering case studies, your answer for a particular case study should be logically structured. There are two things of emphasis here. One, it should be logical, it should be rational, it should not be biased, and it should not be irrational. You have to give reasons for whatever you are writing in the case study. Next, it should be structured. Structured because you need to address the questions asked in the particular case study properly. It should be visible. You have to highlight what you have answered, right? So if you are mentioning 4 possible courses of action, you should highlight the headings by underlining each heading of the 4 possible courses of action, right? If you are mentioning merits and demerits, highlight the word merit, highlight the word demerits, so that your answer looks structured. Your answer should not begin on the top left of the sheet and end on the bottom right of the sheet. You do not have to fill it with words. It has to be very, very clear which section addresses which portion of the question. Okay. Next, your arguments should be consistent. Here, in a case study, what you are essentially doing is debating which courses of action can be taken, what are the potential issues that are involved in the particular case study, right? So you are basically arguing from multiple viewpoints. However, the arguments that you give in your case study have to be consistent with each other. It should not be the case that at one point in the case study, you are favoring Mr. X, in the middle of the case study answer, you are completely against him, and in the end again you are favoring him. So your answers, your arguments should not be contradicting each other. They should be able to fit well with each other, right? However, you can also take conflicting stands in the particular case study, but how you harmonize both the stands, how you take the middle path in your case study, and how you make the final chosen course of action balanced is what will count. Okay, robust reasoning. Your arguments that you make should have proper reasoning. You can take any stand if you are able to justify it with sound logic, proper reasoning, right? So the stand that you take should be fair, it should be lawful, and it should be ethical. The stand cannot be anti-national or anti-constitutional, unethical. It should not be biased towards anyone. It has to be fair, it has to be equitable, it has to be lawful, ethical, it has to be moral. You should have good moral backing for the stand that you are taking, right? And then you have to justify it with proper reasoning. Having said this, there are situations where 2 or 3 particular stands are equally ethical, moral, lawful, or unethical, because you are foregoing the you might be foregoing one person's welfare for someone else's welfare, right? So here, in cases where all the 2 3 alternatives or all the multiple alternatives that you have generated are equally favorable or equally unfavorable, you need to justify the one that you pick with your reasoning. That is what a real life situation also entails. For instance, whatever decisions you take will have widespread impact. So, if you are a district collector of a district and you have been asked who should get the coronavirus vaccine first, right? So you have to choose between government servants who are trying to provide social welfare facilities and utilities day in and day out, or medical healthcare workers who are at the frontier of the coronavirus pandemic, or you can choose the vulnerable population, the aged, the diseased, the children, women, right? So all these groups of people are equally eligible for the vaccination to happen, right? But who will you pick first? You have this constraint, you have a constraint on the number of vaccines which are available, and you have to justify your stand. So here, whoever you pick, you just need to have a good moral reasoning, good practical reasoning, and it should be lawful. Okay, so finally, whatever stand you choose, you must mention the merits of the stand taken and highlight that these are the positives of the decision that you are finally taking, and also try to address the demerits, right? So even if you choose a particular course of action, it is going to have demerits either today or in the future. If there are no demerits, then it is an excellent course of action. You can stop your case study there, right? But if there are potential demerits, just mention those demerits and see how you are going to tackle it in the future. For instance, let us say you choose to uh, get the medical fraternity vaccinated first. However, you still have people who are working on the front lines of the COVID pandemic and providing social utilities who are left out, who will not be vaccinated. So, the potential way of addressing this demerit is that you try to arrange for vaccines for them as soon as possible, and they would be the next in line. Until then, you try to get other consignments of vaccines from other districts or from ask for it from the central government, right? Finally, you need to address all parts of the question that are asked and highlight the sections where you have answered those parts of the questions. The examiner should not have to find out where has this student answered this particular question or this particular part of the question. It should be clearly visible. Okay, so moving to the structure of the case study, there are 6 steps that I have outlined for answering a particular case study. Step number 1 is identifying the facts of the case. Step number 2 is identifying stakeholders and their interests. Step number 3 is identifying ethical dilemmas before the decision maker. Step number 4, brainstorming possible courses of action. Step number 5, choosing a particular course of action. And step number 6, conclusion, right? So this structure of analyzing or attempting a case study is a very general one. It is a comprehensive structure. You must modify this structure according to the questions that are being asked in the particular case study, right? Also, it might be possible that stakeholders have not been asked or ethical dilemmas have not been asked. You're straight away required to answer what will you do in this situation. So you do not need to uh, mention the different courses of action that are available to you or what are the interests of the stakeholders. Just straight away go to what is it that you will be doing in that particular situation. So this structure is a very comprehensive one. It will help you zero in on how to start writing your answer, and you'll identify the important things or whatever the essential points of the case study are that you need to focus on while formulating your answer. So it is a comprehensive structure and you can choose to follow this. Moving to step 1, identifying the facts of the case. So how do you go about identifying which facts are important? So whenever you look at a particular case study question, do one quick reading of the question to understand what is it about and what is being asked, right? First look at the questions that are asked, then look at the background that has been given, the 2-3 paragraphs or half a page that is given, which includes the situation that is ongoing, right? First you should do one reading of the question and then you should look at the background of the case, the text of the case. Why is this important? Because this way you will know that you have to focus on these particular aspects of the questions and you will not waste time on other supplementary things which are mentioned in the case study, right? This will help you in your time management and zeroing in on the answer quickly. In the second reading, underline all facts of the case or mark them with points and brackets, right? Whatever facts are, you should mark all of them so that the moment you look at the underlined case study now or marked case study, you should be able to identify, okay, this paragraph talks about this paragraph talks about this, and these are the important stakeholders, right? This helps you ensure that you do not miss out on any point of importance and also helps you think better. Next, if the question asks you to list issues in the case, this helps identify the main issues involved. So in the case studies that are coming in the exam these days, there is not one or two, there are multiple issues which are involved in the particular case studies. So you should be able to highlight all of them if the question asks you to list those. Finally, keep in mind from whose perspective you have to decide. Are you a doctor in the particular case study? Are you a district collector? Are you a police inspector? Or are you a corporate employee? Are you a government servant? Or are you a relative of someone who is in a key decision making position? So every one of these people will have different considerations in the same situation as compared to others, right? So you are not the student here, but you are a district collector. For instance, a district collector will tackle a situation differently as compared to a police inspector. A police inspector is mostly focused on law and order activities, right? Whereas the district collector is also focused on general welfare and whether beneficiaries are getting enough benefits of the government schemes and other things. So district collector has a wider perspective than a police inspector. A corporate employee mostly focuses on his personal interests, organizational interests, and his personal uh, morals and values along with corporate values or corporate code of conduct, right? He is not concerned with public welfare or public interest. So whatever role you are given, you should be able to put yourself in the shoes of that person to think what you will be doing in that particular scenario, right? Okay. Now, step two, identifying stakeholders and their interests. Even if stakeholders are not asked in the particular question, you should be able to identify the stakeholders because these are the people who will be affected by your decisions. And whatever possible courses of action or decision that you recommend will involve either benefiting these people or harming these people, right? So in your answer, you would be using their interest or their the stakeholders' preferences and values anyway. So you should be able to identify them and what factors are at play in the particular case study in relation to the human aspect of the particular case study, right? So the case study might involve technical issues, it might involve legal issues, it might involve environmental issues, it can also involve human issues, human resources issues, key people who are against each other. For example, there's a government servant who is being pressurized by his boss, there's a member of parliament who is friends with his boss, and then there is a minister who is trying to defend the public servant, trying to act properly, right? So there are multiple people who are involved, and this being a real world case study, you will have different values, biases, preferences, interests, morals, attributes of all these people. So you have to take care of all these things in the answer that you write in your case study. So the next thing that you have to do is identify different stakeholders. Stakeholders are those who will get affected by the decision that you are supposed to take or have an interest in the issues highlighted in the case study, right? It could be a person, institution, social activist, trust, corporate organization, or even environment and biodiversity. For instance, if there is a dam being built which will submerge a particular area of a hill, the environment and biodiversity present there are key stakeholders. You are going to endanger their survival and existence, right? So this is something that you have to take into account in your case study. Stakeholders have different objectives, motives, interests, and preferences. As I already explained, each stakeholder tries to meet his own objective, and these interests will often conflict with each other, right? So the dam being built might help people living in the area with adequate drinking water and water for their farming operations, etc. However, these are in conflict with the ecosystem balance, which is delicate and which might lead to desertification of the area. So these things are in conflict with each other, and how you resolve these things, how you come out with a harmonious solution, is what will fetch you marks in the case study answer. Okay, so identifying stakeholders and their interests. An innovative way to show stakeholders is to make a stakeholder map. On the right hand side of the slide, you can see that I have mentioned a few stakeholders in a particular case study. This is a hypothetical case study. So you have the decision maker, organization, society, family, vulnerable population, government, social activists. So these are a few stakeholders which you can identify looking at the case study. Drawing this in the exam shows that you have identified the key persons getting affected by the ethical issues involved, and it is good value addition. But do spend time on drawing this only if it is asked, otherwise you will be wasting time. Okay, so step 3 is identifying ethical dilemmas before the decision maker. So what is a dilemma? Dilemma is a situation in which a difficult choice has to be made between two or more alternatives, especially ones that are equally undesirable, right? So both these alternatives or multiple alternatives might have equally serious side effects or shortcomings or pitfalls, right? But the situation is such that you have to make a choice between them. So here you should list down a list of dilemmas, conflicts, values, and precedents, if any. So dilemmas, as I said, is whether you should be meeting your personal interest or organizational interest. This is a dilemma. Whether you should be doing what is in your favor or what is in the favor of the organization. Again, this is similar to a conflict, and the values that are being met here, for instance, uh, personal preservation, job preservation is one value that I will be meeting or satisfying if I follow the action of personal interest, right? And I might be compromising my work ethic, my devotion to the organization if I follow the course of action that favors personal interest over organizational interest, right? So these are certain things that you have to keep in mind. Precedents are, for instance, if there is a particular case that has been decided by the High Court or Supreme Court, or there is a particular model case law that you are aware of, which you can list here to decide or to show that your chosen course of action is correct. You can use that. Then you can list down the conflicts of values, but not the resulting actions here. Resulting actions, whatever the consequences of the actions that you take, will be dealt with in the next stages. Here you just have to show that if I follow the orders of my boss who is pressurizing me to do something, then it might lead to cognitive dissonance for me. I might not be able to look at myself in the mirror in the eye, and I might feel guilty about it. But if I don't do it, then my boss is going to stop my promotion, which will lead to my family suffering for no fault of theirs, because my job might not meet my family needs, right? So these are the things that you can write down here. However, try to distinguish between the value and the resulting actions, right? So the value of cognitive dissonance is there. Then in the other part, the family needs not being met is the resulting action which is there, right? So the consequences of the resulting actions you can mention later on. In ethical dilemmas, just mention the values being met, okay? So one instance of categorizing dilemmas is you can categorize them as dilemmas at the personal level, at the organization level, at the social level, and at the government level. So what are the conflicts of values that a person is facing at all these levels, right? And escalate this progressively. First write about personal level, then organizational, then social, and what is the wider impact, and finally what does it mean for the government to change laws or amend any particular act. What should the government do or formulate new rules, right? So an innovative way to show dilemmas is to make a matrix of values. So here, as you can see on the right hand side, is a matrix kind of structure that I have made. It has ethical dilemmas, and you can list what are the personal dilemmas that you are facing, organizational dilemmas, governmental dilemmas, and social dilemmas. So to better elaborate on this, you will be provided with a list of keywords for values, dilemmas, conflicts, and precedents in your notes. I strongly recommend you to use them for maximum value addition in your answers. Once you go through the keywords notes, you will be able to understand what I'm trying to say in a much better fashion. Okay, step 4, brainstorming possible courses of action. Without judging the validity of the actions that you can think of, you should just list down all actions that you can take. This is rough work, so you should do that so that whatever innovative ideas are coming to you, you can pick and choose later on. So mostly there are going to be 3 kinds of actions: extremely good, middle path, and extremely bad. In the exam, due to scarcity of time, you should only list down 3 or maximum 4 possible courses of action. One will be extremely good, one will be extremely bad, and the other 2 can be the middle path, which might have distinct merits and demerits. But include only 3 if the middle path courses of action have a lot of overlap. Then you should include only 3 courses of action and not 4. You must also mention their merits and demerits, at least 2 of each possible course of action that you are taking, right? So the answer in the exam will stand out, or you can differentiate it only when you are analyzing your statements then and there, right? When you're giving the examiner why you have chosen that particular course of action, or why you are listing it down, or for any alternatives that you are listing down, what are the positives and what are the negatives, right? So this is of utmost importance. Merits and demerits have to be mentioned in terms of consequences of actions and values satisfied, right? So in terms of value satisfied, let's say you can write that you won't feel cognitive dissonance, or you won't feel guilty if you do not do something which is corrupt, right? So this is a value that you are satisfying. In terms of actions, you can say that my promotion will be stopped if I don't do that corrupt thing, and my family needs will not be met. So you can mention merits and demerits in both terms, and it's good if you can mention both at the same time. Okay, so one way to show possible courses of action is to use a flowchart. So for instance, in a particular case study, it's a hypothetical case study, and I have just given how you can form the flowchart to show sequential steps in one course of action and consequences in which further follow-up action might be required. So talk to concerned person to give him opportunity to explain his stance. So always when choosing a particular course of action, always give that particular person to explain why he or she is doing that, unless it is pretty evident, or that person is very aggressive in the given case study, or you feel from the circumstances mentioned in the question that this is not possible, right? So maybe that person is not aware of the consequences of his action, so just talk to the concerned person to give him benefit of doubt and let him explain his stance. If he doesn't agree that whatever he is doing is unethical, and talk to his superior to take corrective action. If the superior too doesn't agree and it appears that they are complicit in the wrongdoing, take the evidence. This is important. You must have evidence before you allege anything, right? You must have evidence before you blame someone for something. So take the evidence and write it to the vigilance cell of the department. There should be a vigilance cell or a corporate governance cell if it's a private company. So you can use that. Follow up with your complaint and be ready to face any adverse consequences that might arise as a result of your actions. So you should be mentally and emotionally prepared to face a long drawn battle if you foresee that kind of a situation. These things you have to mention in the particular case study in your answer. Okay, so for brainstorming possible courses of action, you can use different frameworks. It is similar to what you use in essay or GS answers, and I have listed a few over here. So there is one pestle hick, which is political, economic, social, technological, legal, environmental, humanistic, international, and cultural. So any particular case study will not have all these dimensions or aspects involved. So you can pick and choose. This is just a mnemonic to remind you of which directions you can go for. For instance, if it is a minister who has come to know about some wrongdoing, he can take political action. He can try to do some confidence building measures with the opposition and amend a law or something. But if it's a district magistrate, he's an executive authority, he's not a political authority, he's not a legislative authority, so he cannot amend the law. All he can do is try to enforce the laws already there, right? So this is just a beginning point of how you can think of different courses of action. You can think about cultural aspects. For instance, you can have some cultural symbols of the issue that you're trying to address. For instance, if it is cleanliness and having toilets at home, that is a part of the case study, then you can use cultural symbols of purity to get across your point. Then STE has, it involves security, technical, environmental, historical, administrative, geographic, and scientific aspects. This can easily be used in terms of disaster management and similar case studies. So you can use all these aspects in that particular case, in that kind of case study. Social level, so what should be done at an individual level, at a family level, at a community level, at a society level, a professional level, workplace, local, state, national, regional, governmental, and global level, right? So all these levels will not be involved in all the case studies, because for instance the case study is particular for one portion of a country, so you cannot have every stakeholder involved. It may be a domestic issue and it might not be an international issue. So you have to pick and choose accordingly. While mentioning the possible courses of action, you may mention causes, responses, and solutions to the issues. So causes and responses and solutions are some things which you can use to elaborate on the stand that you are taking, and you can identify these from the situation that is given in the particular case study. Next is step 5, choosing a particular course of action. So finally, you should zero in on one particular course of action. It should not be extreme unless the situation warrants that. For instance, even a terrorist's human rights cannot be violated. You have to follow the law, right? The chosen course of action should be ethical as well as practical. It should be doable. It should be balanced, rational, and logical. So you should clearly mention the particular course of action, specify its merits, and also specify its demerits, and give possible solutions to address the demerits of the same. Finally, you should escalate progressively in the chosen course of action. So first, you should try to persuade the person who is involved in wrongdoing. Then you can choose to let him know that if he does not mend his ways, you will be taking a one particular action. Then you go meet his superior. If he is also not cooperative, you go to the vigilance cell. So you should escalate progressively from persuasion gradually to the punitive courses of action, right? Moving on. Step 6 is the conclusion. Basically, step 5 and 6 go hand in hand. So you, in the conclusion, mention the values upheld by the chosen course of action, benefits that are accruing as a result of what you have decided, and you need to give reasoning, justify your stand, why the chosen course of action is best among all possible alternatives. Finally, even after addressing the demerits, still if there are some pitfalls, you should mention the pitfalls and which should be kept in mind, right? So some things that you should keep in mind are UPSC is not only asking situation-based case studies these days or administrative case studies, which are just related to government. Focus has shifted to analysis of major issues and business-oriented case studies as well. So there are different kinds of subjects which UPSC is touching upon. So keep a keen eye out in the newspapers when you read the newspapers to identify potential issues, and you will be able to solve the case studies if you read newspapers regularly and have the knack of identifying the major issues involved in the particular articles that come up in the newspapers. Then questions asked in the case study needs to be addressed, right? So the main thing or the final thing that you have to do is to address the questions that have been asked. You need to modify the process that has been explained so far according to the demands of the question. Just straight away answer those questions. Do not add, do not do any value addition over here uh, of mentioning something extra or futuristic, because it's not required at all and it will waste your time. For instance, if stakeholders or possible courses of action are not asked in the question, don't mention it. Just if only what you will be doing in that particular scenario is asked, just straight away write what you will do. Okay. Finally, a note on time management. Keep around 105 minutes for section B in the exam, because section A is mostly theory based and those are short questions, so you can manage it in the other 75 minutes that are left. Section B has case studies, you have to read the case studies also. So 105 minutes is a decent time frame, but do not overshoot it at any cost. This gives around 17 minutes for each case study, 17.5 minutes to be precise. First, read questions before going through the case study so that you can sift the data required to address those questions, and mark the data whenever you come across the data that is required. Scan the case study quickly, underlining what can be used to answer the questions, right? So time management is extremely important. If there are 3 questions asked, then give 5 minutes to answering each subpart of the each question that is that has been asked in the case study. Distribute your time and points evenly, right? It's a 20-mark question and you have 3 questions which are asked for the particular case study. Then you should write at least 6 to 7 points in each question that has been asked. So thank you. I hope that you liked this particular video. In the future videos, we will be looking at particular categories of case studies and solving them together. So stay tuned and do go through the notes that have been provided to you as part of the ethics series by Sunya.